Welcome, everyone. I'm David Alexander. I'll be moderating today's virtual discussion, Catastrophe to Opportunity, Following the Science. I serve as the Director of Resilience and Strategic Partners and a Senior Science Advisor at the DHS Science and Technology Directorate, what we commonly refer to as S&T. We brought this conversation to CES because we wanted to better understand and talk about what investments and resources are in place to help communities drive down risk and the synergies science and technology has with industry. Following our talk, our hope is for you to get more connected to our R&D efforts and to drive a more deliberate conversation on the future of resilience. So let's get started. Here's the format. We will kick off our discussion with some brief remarks. We'll then move to a virtual fireside chat exchange, focusing on where government and industry need to rethink strategies to build resilience capacity in the COVID era. We have a fantastic panel lined up, so let me introduce the group. On the panel, we have Catherine Cross, Deputy Undersecretary for DHS Science and Technology, Ted Smith, Professor of Environmental Medicine at the University of Louisville and advisor to Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher, and Richard Seeline, Executive Director for Resilience Accelerator, located in Houston, Texas. With that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Kathy Cross for some brief remarks.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I know everyone's busy and we can sure appreciate that, but we appreciate your time and participation in shaping this conversation around resilience today. I'm going to start by explaining who we are at S&T and why we're here at CES today. S&T is the R&D arm of DHS. We're the innovation hub for discovering, incubating, and accelerating solutions for the brave security personnel who work the front lines to keep our nation safe. To give a little perspective, when you think about first responders, FEMA, TSA agents, critical infrastructure operators, or others, S&T's mandate is to understand their problems and leverage best-in-class technologies and technical guidance to drive down risk, safeguard operations, and ultimately save lives and property. S&T R&D investments must account for changes in our security posture as it advances. We must discover breakthrough technologies and our ability to develop public-private partnerships across the U.S. and abroad. COVID-era challenges have really encouraged us to get creative on perspectives about how we will update R&D approaches to address the challenges of today, the emerging threats of tomorrow, and workforce of the future for the department and for the nation. This gets to why I'm here today. To do big things going forward, like moving beyond the crisis to reopening and recovering, we need to expand our partnerships across government and industry. We need to collaborate to identify improvements to the way we modify and transfer emerging technologies to Homeland Security mission operations. I hope each of you will visit our virtual booth here at CES to learn about our whole of government R&D initiatives and how we're leveraging partnerships to transfer technologies to frontline security operators. As an example, S&T recently announced a $215,000 prize challenge called the Power of Passengers Challenge. We're asking help to innovate how TSA can use data to enhance security operations and improve airline travelers' experiences. To effectively navigate future challenges, S&T is rethinking how technology and infrastructure can help us better manage risks. This includes broadening the scope to other areas as well, like sensor technology advances and how they can improve prediction and preparedness capabilities. Today, I'm pleased that Ted Smith is here from Louisville and Richard Seeline from Houston, and they're here to highlight some of their initiatives on public health, economic recovery, and national security. In order to innovate our way through this crisis by building resilience capacity for our communities, we need to reach a starting point to frame the right questions. Answering these questions will help us better understand capability gaps and R&D needs and how to invest in resilience. This collaboration is very important because security and resilience are shared responsibilities across government and industry. When faced with emerging threats and risks, together we need to identify synergies, take on early investment risks, and promote best practices and cultivate tech adoption. By reimagining the future of resilience, we'll be better equipped to address other challenges like climate security, urbanization, and operational impacts of mobility, AI, machine learning, and quantum, and prepare the DHS workforce for tomorrow. Let me end on this note. If we're not organized effectively, we will not achieve the results we need to reduce risks and save lives. DHS can't solve these problems on its own, which is why our conversation today is so very important. I want to thank you again for joining us today. We have a great panel lined up, and I look forward to the conversation. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Kathy. So before we begin, I want to just give Richard a chance, if he could just take a moment and just update our audience on what initiatives you are leading in the Houston area.
Well, David, thank you for including me, and of course, working with you and Kathy and Ted over the past several months. Simply put, when you are coming off of, the third year of post-Harvey, not just in Greater Houston, but frankly, the entire Texas Gulf Coast, then on top of it, you have persistent storms, as you know, David, especially that we hit the largest amount of named storms, tropical and hurricanes ever, and then COVID hits. So as you and others have found, it's simultaneous disasters, one after another, which usually you have some time to kind of breathe and accept and, and catch up. Well, none of us have been able to slow down. And so to Kathy's point, the change for COVID is that it really has emphasized the issues of working remotely. Therefore, Kathy, we're now having to work smart, and therefore the smart technology, smart city applications are critical. And at the same time, when you lose $1 trillion, David, on the U.S. Gulf Coast, which is both the sum for FEMA, NFIP, and the private sector insurance, what we finally realized was that there was a need to connect the dots between the public and private for pre-disaster risk mitigation investing. And that is the reason for the formation of the Resilience Accelerator and the Resilience Innovation Hub that has already, had an opportunity to work with you and Ted and Kathy. So our initiative is very, very simple. Where can we find the best technology, the best equipment, and frankly, the best minds across the United States and connect them very quickly into investable products and solutions for the insurance and reinsurance industry, along with the private equity marketplace?
That was great. So Ted, why don't I give you a moment and why don't you share a little bit of what you have going on with the audience?
Sure. Well, thank you for including me in this great conversation today. Our story here in Louisville is maybe not that remarkable because I think all of the cities in the United States have been really overrun and working as hard as they can to turn this situation around. And by that I mean specifically the COVID pandemic. Our work very early on was not unlike GM making ventilators. We repurposed our research operations to focus on finding much more robust ways to understand the spread of the virus in our communities. And, we stood up a very ambitious project in partnership with Mayor Greg Fisher and his administration in the city. I'm at the University of Louisville. The university is a great partner to that. And over the past 7 or 8 months, we've built just a significant fabric of partnerships to get to know new ways, specifically through the sanitary sewer system, to get our arms around these kinds of threats so that we're not so reactive next time is really our goal in Louisville.
That was terrific. So just following up a little bit on this, I think both of you alluded to the concepts of smart city solutions, American infrastructure, and then tying that both to science, industry, as well as talent. Could you just take a moment, maybe starting with you, Richard, and just elaborate a little bit to just tease out for the audience what you think that really means.
Well, let me play off something that Ted said. We are realizing, sad but true, the pandemic taught us new lessons, but frankly reinforced some lessons learned. One is about the supply chains. And the reality is that we tend to know where the public supply chains are. We tend to know where the private sector supply chains are. What we don't know is where those two can better align. We've got some significant expertise in the way of Amazon and Walmart and others who know where product is. But what's also missing, not just the ability to bring those two together, is that we have a lot of first responders. And Kathy, not to diminish the role of certifying first responders, but I think the big gap has been we need community-based responders who play a role in bringing these sectors together. And Ted, you've been playing that role, as have others. So I think one of the serious gaps that needs to be addressed, David, going forward is how do we unleash the private sector and the nonprofit regional community folks further into this in a way where it doesn't create more demand on the first responders in the public sector. So I think that's an opportunity for us to work on going forward in 2021. And then the last part real quick, and we can talk about infrastructure, is that we now know that we're going to have to really invest on around infrastructure. And it's not just the public infrastructure. We're going to open up, Kathy, as you said, we've got to give people the assurance that they're walking into safe environments. And we kind of knew that about flood and other kinds of disasters. So I do think we've learned a lot of lessons. It's now 2021 is incumbent upon us to actually do the implementation.
So Ted, building off of what Richard said, and I think some of your earlier comments, particularly around this idea of more persistent and chronic events, and your experience both in the academic science community as well as your practical role in advising the city of Louisville and the mayor. What is your advice? What do you see as how we frame the right questions in a way that we get outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the the great opportunity here is to get out of the siloed compartmentalizing of these problems, right? So, you could say disaster preparedness and management is a public sector responsibility. The truth of the matter is, in this day and age, there are many, many stakeholders who bring many, many different kinds of skill sets and capabilities to any particular challenge. And, really, I think we have to challenge ourselves to make a bigger tent, for many of these conversations. And so, from my perspective, very early on, we figured out that what was working about, say, the healthcare system and their ability to test people or whatever, or treat people, was a mature infrastructure that was working for that task. When you started to look at the urbanized version of that, so what is it out in where people live, we didn't have a similar kind of mature framework. And when the smart cities movement started many years ago, I think we all sort of envisioned that there would be this information-rich landscape that we would all benefit from. And I think we're now just starting to see how that actually would execute. And it doesn't execute as strictly a public sector activity, a dashboard for the mayor, right? We know that isn't actually what works. That isn't actually what makes a difference. A dashboard for our community, a dashboard that has many stakeholders who are both contributing and drawing from it, that actually is a workable, sustainable, long-term solution. And so we've really been doing some deep rethinking on what smart cities are as not a public sector only conversation and vendors to the public sector and what will the public sector buy, but rather what does a community need to be healthy, to be resilient. That's the right question. And then, go build a solution with the right partners and have it be adaptable over time. So we're starting on a new version of smart cities that's a little more inclusive than I think the last version.
So I want to just pull that thread a little bit, really building and expanding on this discussion around making innovations, ecosystems more nimble, more inclusive, moving away from traditional thinking and really focusing on more value-based outcomes and benefits. So Richard, in some previous discussions, you've brought up this idea, this concept of a P4. Why don't you share with the audience here what you mean by P4? Who does it include, and how do you see that as a game change potentially in the future resilience sector?
Yeah, David, I'm thinking about the audience that we're talking with today from the consumer electronics in CTA. These are individuals that are innovators and entrepreneurs, meaning they don't work within the lines. And I'll use this politely, we call them a part of the GSD, the Get Stuff Done networks, right? They're going to go figure out how to make something work. And what drives them is the market. Let's be blunt, all right? What we now know from all of this data, including what Ted mentioned, is the data science really now connects all of these threats along the lifelines, the economic, social. But what we also are connecting is the economic and financial risk, right? So the P4 is public, private, philanthropic. The philanthropic community, again, as Ted and Kathy know, has really stepped up to help these communities going through some pretty unique struggles, especially the low to moderate income neighborhoods, right? What we're finding is that there are thousands of new investors out there in the insurance and reinsurance industry, in the social impact investing. I think if we can find a way to connect the investors who are kind of like a pull, they're pulling things through the process, and they're driven by performance, which is also a unique part. Ted, I think we've changed the perception about procurement going forward as well, and that is ultimately it's performance based. We need to align those, David, with what you at DHS, FEMA, and the whole of government is doing, all right? I think we have an opportunity in 2021 with the CES community to really unleash the next generation of innovation here.
Yeah, so picking up a little bit on that, Kathy, with so many stakeholder communities involved and it now being more inclusive, really reaching out and engaging, these innovators, making industry more an active partner with the R&D sector, as well as leveraging philanthropy and investment. What do you think is the best role for S&T to play in the future?
Thanks, David. S&T is a conduit between DHS, mission operations, and industry. To be successful, we really need to set the conditions that incentivize and lower the risk for industry to invest in our priorities. As Richard mentioned, through our partnerships, we have to work at the pace of discovery and really deliver solutions. This week at CES, we're promoting our Homeland Security Startup Studio partnership with FedTech. And this partnership fosters innovation for commercial and Homeland Security applications by pairing entrepreneurs with DHS technologies. The Startup Studio recruits entrepreneurs and matches them with promising technologies from federal labs to launch new ventures. There's so many ways to work with S&T. So I implore you to please visit our virtual CES exhibit booth to learn more about partnering opportunities and how to engage our components, our national labs, university centers of excellence, and whole of government research partners. You'll get a good sense of our COVID R&D impacts and how S&T is enhancing public health security and helping to get this country back on track.
So just following up and kind of coming back to a few earlier statements, I think, Kathy, you're hitting on that DHS has a unique role to play, not just as an investor, but also in catalyzing and communicating requirements, helping to validate and affirm technology solutions, but also in working with our components and our stakeholders to prepare the conditions so that we can fast track adoption of those technologies to get better outcomes and faster return. So So Ted, why don't I start with you, because I think you're kind of at the fulcrum. I think you're starting to demonstrate how that could work in Louisville with some of your work on wastewater-based epidemiology. So why don't you, if you could just share a few thoughts on how were you able to get that done, and what was the missing ingredient that has really made the difference for you?
Yeah, well, I think that's a fantastic question, and I torture myself with it regularly. So, I think it's important for our audience to know one of the first calls I made when I figured out where our limitations were in this project was to you, David, over at S&T. And so, our very first barriers to really leveraging wastewater-based epidemiology to protect the health of the public in this country were in the infrastructure. I mean, it was an infrastructure that was not designed for the mission. It was designed for a different mission. It does that mission really well. It doesn't do this mission really, really well. And so as boring as it can be to talk about things like standards and all of that, it's critically important. And so I'm grateful for the dialogue and engagement of your agency in the role that it plays, which is an important one as we innovate, right? So it isn't about caretaking necessarily of the old infrastructure and, let's just make sure it doesn't break. That's not the mission, right? The mission is to keep up with the pace of society. And, right now we have as Richard said earlier, just compounding, catastrophe, right? And I don't think there's any rational reason to imagine that the world is going to suddenly become calm for a long period of time. I think, if I were a hedge fund manager, I'd be betting on a lot more of this happening all the time in the future. And so the mission for infrastructure in the United States is a new mission, and it is to be constantly innovating and constantly following the requirements, right, of a prosperous economic society. And so, I don't even think twice about it anymore. I think there's no better role for the federal government to play for this particular corner that I'm focused on, which is we're going to develop a new field and we're going to protect the American public in new ways and more powerful ways. We're going to need that kind of leadership, convening, organizing both other members of the public sector and many different kinds of members from the private sector. It's been fun to see philanthropy in the mix. I mean, for us, philanthropy was the seed capital, if you will, to get our program started while we were waiting for federal programs and other mechanisms to kick in. And so it's been a great education for us on how we all have to work differently, but we all have very important, unique, high-value roles. And I think understanding that, making the most of it is really the assignment that we have.
David, can I just make one quick observation off of what Ted just said? And again, it ties back to Kathy's comments at the beginning. There are a lot of what we refer to as underutilized or unrecognized assets in the public sector. Like Ted said, they do one mission, but no one's ever really looked and stepped back and said, we can actually leverage those assets side by side with the private sector, all right? The issue sometimes is that these silos need a bridge, and that bridge could be philanthropy, but frankly, it could be DHS S&T, because most of these public assets have received some form of a federal grant or contract for the performance and delivery. And I welcome the opportunity, and frankly, Kathy, implore through this means and CES and others, to what we really need in 2021 are these bridges and ways to incentivize innovators and investors to really move the next generation of this country's infrastructure.
So Richard, you read my mind, and I was going to tee you up for the exact same question. So you jumped ahead of me, and that was perfect. I would like to just kind of pose a follow-on for you on, so what is the unique role that the Resilience Accelerator plays? I mean, you've just outlined some very interesting and I think some profound ways that we can better work together. But I know you're on the tip of the spear. So how are you putting that into action?
Yeah, I think that it's been a long time coming from what I understand, over the past 20 plus years, the insurance and reinsurance sector have really been looking at using their predictive analytics and their financial and risk modeling. What I think is about ready to happen, and one of the roles that we are working with the Insurance Information Institute and their peers is to really move this domino forward, which means, David, that pre-disaster risk mitigation, whether it's Wharton or Columbia or Rice University down here, or Ted, I'm sure your university is looking at this. We now know that the return on investment for pre-disaster risk mitigated investing exceeds anything that we're doing right now in the post-recovery and rebuild. So our objective is to really find ways to unlock insurance as economic capital and to unleash the public-private philanthropic partnerships through both a package of technologies and project development. That's what our role and mission is. And so I think that there stands at the ready a whole set of investors, a whole set of resources that are also unrecognized and underdeveloped. And I think, Kathy, what you said, is really a charge. It's really a challenge to us in the private sector to come to the table to you, DHS, and to the whole of government with some practical solutions that are ready to go now, not ones that, are 2-3 years worth of study and analysis. I think, Ted, you have found, as I have, there really is a sense of urgency, but also, frankly, a sense of passion for this country to stand up and step up.
Yeah. So I think what I'd characterize it as, I think you're hitting on, mitigation needs to be long-term, forward thinking, and it needs to start to connect to the pace of innovation and the pace of change.
Yes.
So we only got a couple minutes. I would like to just close with a few remarks, and then thank you all for participating in the panel. It's been a fantastic conversation. I know we could just continue and go on and on. There is an opportunity for folks to visit with us and learn more about us as panelists, as well as some of the more additional research and activities going on across the government community. So I do encourage folks to attend our exhibit booth to find out more information, as well as to learn a little bit more about what S&T is doing around building whole of government innovation teams with collaborators like Ted and Richard that are on this panel today, and really move research into action to drive more profound and impactful outcomes. And we have a tremendous cross-section of agency partners that are committing to the team, and those include not just DHS components like FEMA and TSA and CISA, but we also have agencies like EPA, DOE, DOT, and the National Science Foundation, coming with us to really lead a new conversation and new investment in resilience S&T. So again, thank you, panelists. On behalf of Kathy, Ted, and Richard, we appreciate the opportunity to share this conversation with you and some of our ideas and thoughts about moving the community forward, and welcome you to join us in the future. So thank you very much.